The most popular teams to talk about in the offseason every year is the Ole Miss Rebels. Lane Kiffin is one of the more talked about coaches in college football, and he's a really fun follow, and he's always so an interesting coach to talk about. Every single year, we look at what he has done in the offseason as well as the year before, and he's just, again, so interesting to discuss because there's potential where you see a high ceiling. You also see a lot of things that could potentially go wrong in the eyes of pretty much everybody outside of the Ole Miss program. But that's what makes him so interesting. Even when if he's winning or he's losing, he is someone that everyone wants to talk about. They have plenty to say. Everyone has an opinion of him. And this year should be another year of that. And he's done a great job of bringing in talent to let this team compete. And with the expanded college football playoff, this team has its sights on competing in that tournament. Now, before we do that, though, before we take a deep dive into the Ole Miss Rebels, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video. It goes a long way in helping the channel grow. We have seen tremendous growth over the last just 3 months. This has been the best stretch that I've had on this channel, and it's not possible without all of you. So subscribe to the channel. Let's keep this train going, and let's dive into the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, Lane Kiffin obviously is going to be a huge part of the play calling. He is a big part of obviously the program, and he is someone who's a great college football mind when it comes to getting talent to come to campus and person who knows how to market his program. He knows how to adapt to trends. He is very much in tune with what's going on in college football as well as the rest of the world. You've seen a number of different things that he has done, and it's a great way to market your program to get certain players. Obviously, the Portal King thing has been his thing, but it's really his offensive play calling that honestly kind of gets pushed aside at times because of his antics, his Twitter presence or X presence, whatever you want to call it. It's always going to be Twitter to me. But he is a big reason why Ole Miss is on the map right now because of his presence. Now, Charlie Weiss Jr. is going to help him calling that offense. And this was an offense that was extremely explosive last year, one of the better offenses in college football, one of the best in the SEC. Pete Golding is going to run the defense, and this is a defense that needs to take a step forward. But when you look at the talent they got from the transfer portal as well as the talent they have returning, you feel really good about where this defense is at. It's just a matter of taking that step. So you feel good about what the coaching staff is. You feel good about what Lane Kiffin is building. It's just a matter of getting those guys to work together and find players that are going to help them win football games against big time competition. Now, the transfer portal obviously is something that Lane Kiffin is well known for. Everybody knows the Portal King bid. We already talked about that, but this is a group that has done a great job of recruiting, and there are a number of players that it feels like we don't have enough time to discuss all of them, but we're going to try. Isaiah Hamilton comes in from Houston. He is a very underrated cornerback that should contribute for this team right away. Chris Hardy comes in at defensive end from Jacksonville State. He is someone that is going to be part of that rotation, a very good group of defensive linemen that we'll talk about. You get Dominique Thomas from Georgia State, underrated running back for sure. Henry Parrish returns after going to Miami. He is back to be part of that deep running back group. Trey Amos comes in from Alabama. He will be at the cornerback position, so you feel pretty good about that. Nate Kalepo comes in from Washington, a Washington team that lost so much talent through the transfer portal and the NFL draft. Amorian Walker comes in from Michigan. Logan Diggs will come in from LSU to contribute to that running back room. Again, a deep running back room. Diego Pounds should be one of the starters on the offensive line. Yam Banks is in that secondary. Rashad Amos is another player that's going to contribute to the rushing attack coming in from Miami, Ohio. There's so many guys that are part of this. Princely Umanmielen is going to take over at one of the defensive end positions or one of those hybrid positions. You look at Key Lawrence comes in from Oklahoma. He started for the Sooners last year at safety. He will start potentially or be part of the rotation for Ole Miss. Juice Wells was probably one of the biggest gets for this team at wide receiver. That gives them another great option out alongside Trey Harris. Chris Paul Jr. comes in at linebacker from Arkansas. That's a very good player that you get. And then the best player that they got was Walter Nolan. Getting him from Texas A&M was a huge get for Lane Kiffin. He had a number of big time additions, and that one was his biggest yet. Daquan Wright is a tight end that will be a contributor right off the bat. And then Jaquan Scott comes in on the interior line. So you have a number of players that are going to be, excuse me, Amari Walker actually is not part of that. He is not going to be part of this team as he came in, I forgot, and he is heading out. But this is a team that did a good job of bringing in a ton of talent, and obviously you kind of had to with some of the players you lost. The Zachary Franklin experiment did not work. That just never got off the ground. So that just is what it is there. You lost Quinshon Judkins. That one honestly hurts quite a bit. Ladarius Tennyson is gone, going to UCF. Michael Trigg, just again, another one that just didn't quite work how they expected it to. So you lost some players that you feel are going to hurt, but you also did a good job. I should say Lane Kiffin did a good job of bringing in players to replace that talent and also elevate the ceiling for this group. And when you dive into what this offense could be, even without Quinshon Judkins, you feel pretty good about what this group is, where they could go. Now, this is a group that finished 19th in passing, even with Judkins. So this is a group whose identity, I'm not going to say is unaffected, but it's definitely not going to get a huge dent in it because Judkins was gone. Now, he is an elite talent that's going to hurt to lose, but you also get guys in the transfer portal that are going to help. Jackson Dart is back at the quarterback position. This is a guy who Ole Miss fans expect to compete for the Heisman Trophy. They expect him to take another step, and I see it. You saw the talent at USC comes to Ole Miss, and pairing him with Lane Kiffin feels like it has a lot of upside for 2024. And this is a guy who, there's always one guy that when you're looking at who is going to be that surprise player in college football, a guy who rises up into the first round of the NFL draft. Jackson Dart could be that guy. He has the talent to do it. We saw what he's capable of doing with the football in his hands. And we know that he is a really good player, over 3,300 yards with 23 touchdowns last year. He is someone that if you're, I don't think, I mean, we're talking about him, but I don't think we're talking about him the right way. And if this offense is what I think it's capable of being, then Jackson Dart is going to have a monster year. Walker Howard, the former LSU transfer, is behind him. He is the future of this program. So if Dart does have this big year, it's on to Walker Howard, and we'll see what he's capable of doing. The running back position, like I said, loses Quinshon Judkins. That is a massive hit to that group. However, Ulysses Bentley is back. Now, while he's not Judkins, he is a very talented player. That's going to be really fun to watch. Trey Amos and Logan Diggs are going to compete for that starting spot as well. So that's good depth to have. And then you also bring in Henry Parrish, like we talked about. You bring him back to Ole Miss. So that's a quad of really good players that are going to bring quality depth as well as good talent to the rushing attack. And again, this is a rushing attack that finished 40th, so not bad by any means. But I think that this group is going to obviously miss Judkins, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to miss his production. I don't know if they feel that they haven't replaced him. So that's going to be interesting to watch what that rushing attack does. It's also going to help Jackson Dart in that passing attack. And speaking of that passing attack, oh boy, this is going to be a really fun group. We talked about Juice Wells coming in to join Trey Harris. Now, those are two of the better wide receivers in this conference in college football. Those are two guys that can dominate a game and can make life very difficult for anybody that they are facing. So when you look at what Ole Miss brings to the table for Jackson Dart, you have two elite players that could go in the first or second round of the NFL draft. You also bring back Jordan Watkins. So that is a trio of wide receivers that is going to make life very miserable for the secondaries that they face. Now, you also add in tight end Caden Prescorn. Again, Caden Prescorn, who came in from Memphis 2 years ago, one of the most underrated tight ends, one of the most underappreciated tight ends in the SEC. He is someone who has a ton of talent and is a good target for Jackson Dart. So that starting lineup feels like it's pretty good. Daquan Wright comes in from Virginia Tech for the tight end position as well. So you feel pretty good about the depth at that position. Hudson Wolf is behind him. The depth at wide receiver is interesting. Aiden Williams, Deion Smith, and Caden Lee will be the next guys up. And you have a various levels of confidence in each of those guys. Obviously, the trio of starters is really where everything gets going. But with how quickly they want to play, depth is also going to be a piece of that puzzle. You get Devin Price from FAU. He could be part of that. Noreel White and Marquise Willis will also be a part of that rotation as well. So again, you expect a lot of guys to contribute. It's just a matter of how much depth do you have at wide receiver, and you feel pretty good about the tight end position. So if you're an Ole Miss fan, this is a group that should produce some really exciting results in 2024. This is a group that expects to do really good things. And if they're going to compete in the SEC and for a college football playoff spot, the offense must do its part. And I expect it to do exactly that. The offensive line plays a big role in that. Does not matter how much talent you have at the skill positions if you can't block anybody. And you feel pretty good about what this team is coming back, as well as what they brought in from the transfer portal. We talked about Diego Pounds and Nate Kalepo in the transfer portal from North Carolina and Washington. Those are two guys that are going to make things very easy for this offense. Caleb Warren is back at center. He is someone who is going to be a really valuable asset for Jackson Dart. So that is something that's going to be really fun for this offense. You also get Jeremy James back. He'll be at guard now instead of tackle. So that's a good fit for him. And then Micah Pettis, a junior at 6'7, 360 pounds, absolutely massive human being that is going to have a really interesting year. Then you feel pretty good about the depth behind them. Jaden Williams and Eli Acker at the tackle positions are two names to keep an eye on. And then you also have, we talked about Jerkon Scott coming in from Southern Miss. I think that you feel good about him, but again, can you handle that transition? And then if Caleb Warren goes down, Reese McIntyre is the next guy up. So we'll see what the center position looks like if they need to go to depth. That's probably going to be the biggest question is can you keep guys healthy and how much depth do you have up front and how are you capable of keeping this electric offense going? Because you have plenty of options at the skill positions, but do you have the depth at other positions that need to be elite if you're going to get to that college football playoff or compete in the SEC. This is not going to be an easy schedule no matter who you are in the SEC, but you feel pretty good if you are an Ole Miss fan. And when you look at their schedule, which we will do later on, you have a potential good start, a great start, I should say, in your sights. And it's just a matter of, again, staying healthy and seeing what this group is capable of doing. Flip over to the defensive side of the ball. This is a group that finished in the 70s for most of their statistical categories. And that's a group that must take a step forward. They must get better if you want to achieve those results that you want in 2024. The college football playoff is not going to be easy to attain. You have to finish probably 10-2, and the defense must play a role in that. When you look at the defensive line, you have two returners and you have two new faces in the starting line. Jared Ivey is a very interesting player, very good frame that can handle life on the edge. You put him back into that lineup. J.C. Pegas is also back. You get Walter Nolan from the transfer portal. Princely Umanmielen is a guy coming in from Florida. So you feel really good about the upgrades you added to those two positions, the nose position and the other edge position. So that's really interesting. The jack position is that kind of that hybrid role. We'll see how they utilize those guys. Cam Franklin is the backup there, and Chamberlain Campbell is a very interesting player at that third string for the jack position. We talked about Chris Hardy and his value at the defensive end position. Jared Ivey is very good, but if they need to go to a rotation, Chris Hardy has the explosiveness. You could also see a guy like DJ Holmes in that rotation as well. Xavier Harris is behind Walter Nolan, assuming that, I mean, you're going to see those interior players probably rotated in and out a little bit more. The talent level is definitely going to drop, and that's no shot to Xavier Harris. That's just how good Walter Nolan and Kalo Stone is going to come in at defensive tackle as well. So you have good options if you're Ole Miss on the defensive line, and the defensive line is where everything starts. And this is a group that is going to face really good talent. When you look at some of the teams they're going to face this year, you do see Georgia. That is a team that has an elite offensive line. They are going to make your life very miserable if you don't have the right guys in place. And also, you're going to require depth. And that's why you bring in players like Walter Nolan. That's why you bring in Chris Hardy to bring in depth at certain positions and elevate the talent as well. So that will be really fun to watch. And that's really the tone setter for this defense. Behind them, though, you feel pretty good. Ari Coleman is back for another year. He is a former TCU transfer that was kind of a defensive end, and he has found a good role at linebacker for Ole Miss. Next to him is Chris Paul Jr., a tackling machine from Arkansas. So you feel really good about the starting position for the linebackers for this Rebels team. That's a duo that's going to be really fun, a very underrated duo. I don't think a lot of people know who Kari Coleman is in the college football world. Everyone, I think that more people know Chris Paul Jr., but still not a lot of people know them. So that's a very underrated duo, a duo that knows how to be explosive, disruptive, and knows how to find the ball carrier really well. You have Suntarine Perkins and TJ Dudley behind them. Raymond Collins and Tyler Banks could also be part of that rotation as well. So we'll keep an eye on what that depth looks like and how those guys starting are able to elevate their game and make this group really disruptive because the defensive line should make life pretty easy for this group. It's just a matter of what can they do, and you feel pretty good with Coleman and Paul and what they have coming back and what they bring to the table as well. You have a good front six that are very disruptive at times, and that opens things up for a secondary that has a lot of new faces. You're going to have a lot of different starters. The cornerback position has two new starters in Trey Amos and Isaiah Hamilton. Hamilton was very underrated at Houston. I think there are still some questions about his game and what he can do, but he has the talent to be an elite player. Trey Amos, obviously, everyone expects to start right off the bat. Behind them, Chris Graves will compete with Hamilton for that starting spot. I think Amos, I wouldn't say has a spot locked up, but Graves is going to have a tough time pushing him. AJ Brown behind him is also another name to keep an eye on. Returners John Saunders and Trey Washington take over the safety positions, and then USA South Alabama transfer Yam Banks is going to take over the nickel position. Now, Yam Banks is a turnover machine. He's a ball hawk and knows what to do when the ball's in the air. He's a former safety for the Jaguars there, and he comes in as high expectations. Jaden Candidate comes in from Tulane, a very underrated player that could play a huge role for this defense as well. And then we talked about Key Lawrence before. He could play the safety position. He could play instead of John Saunders. We'll see what happens there. But you also that again, that's what the depth does for your team. That's what depth does for your program. You're feeling pretty good about where this team is headed because you have so much talent. And everything obviously starts up front, but this secondary also needs to take a step forward. They finished 75th against the pass last year, and they do have some talent coming back. But again, as you can see, there is a lot of new incoming talent that is not familiar with this program and not exactly understanding of where they need to be right now. And that's why fall camp is great because you get more practice for these guys, you get more reps. And that's going to be the biggest thing is you don't have, and the one thing I say is we talk about building culture and we talk about building programs, and Lane Kiffin has done a good job of building his program how he wants, and a lot of that has to do with the amount of turnover that you see. And when you're playing the SEC, you have certain players that you recruit, and if they don't see the field right off the bat, it's kind of hard to keep them around. So you're going to bring in a lot of new faces. You're going to bring in a lot of transfers, and you see that in the secondary, in the first 10 guys in terms of corner safety and the nickel position, you have 7 of those guys that are transfers. So that's going to take some time to get acclimated with each other. None of them are coming from the same school. So they came from different schemes, they came from different places, and now they're joining a team that is going to have a lot of new faces. I mean, the starting lineup for the defense alone has 6 of their 11 starters that are new. And within the 2 deep, you add to those 6, you add another 5. So 11 of those 22, half of your first 22 guys for your defense are transfers. And again, none of them are coming from the same school. So that's what makes things very difficult is you're trying to build a culture, you're trying to build some camaraderie and find ways to get guys to communicate, and that's not going to be easy. You're simply not going to be able to do that overnight. And that's where things get really difficult because if you're not able to communicate, if you're not able to understand where your teammate is going to go or what they do on a typical down to down basis, you're going to find that life is a little bit more difficult. And that's the challenge that this team faces. But at the same time, you feel really good about the talent they have coming back. And the secondary is really a perfect example of that. Now, what does that mean for winning football games? The schedule is going to present plenty of opportunities to win plenty of those. And again, nobody really knows what the minimum requirement is going to be again in the college football playoff. Right now, it feels like 10-2, but in the SEC and the Big Ten, it feels like you can go 9-3, and it just depends on who you lose to and what your wins look like, which obviously that's obvious. That's every single year, but this case is going to be even more relevant because it's a 12-team playoff. Now, Furman and Middle Tennessee and Wake Forest. Even it's a trip to Wake Forest. Again, there's a lot of games this year that are very random because you see a lot of teams that are going to, Missouri is going to UMass. It's so random, but I love it. Ole Miss going to Wake Forest is an interesting game as well. So, and then you have Georgia Southern after that. Those are four winnable games. That's a 4-0 start, if you ask my opinion. I think that they are going to start off really well, and that brings you to the Kentucky game. Now that's a home game. If that was a road game, that's a really tough road game. But getting Kentucky at home leads me to believe that they have a really good chance, especially because they've won the last three meetings between these two teams. So we'll see what happens there. That's probably a 5-0 start at South Carolina. If South Carolina truly is playing as hard as I think they can, which I talked about on my deep dive, then this is a team that could be tough to beat, and it's on the road. But again, playing the SEC on the road, you just never know what is going to happen. You just don't know what is going to go on in the SEC. And the fact that they have LSU the week after, maybe Ole Miss gets caught looking ahead. I doubt that, but there's always going to be that talk of are they looking ahead to what they perceive as a tougher test? South Carolina is a tough test, as is LSU. But again, if this is an Ole Miss team that is destined for the college football playoff, those are both winnable games. You get 2 weeks off to prepare for Oklahoma at home. You go two Arkansas, and then again another game where if you're caught looking ahead, you could lose to Arkansas because you're worried about Georgia. Now, that's a game that I think almost everybody's going to pick Georgia to win that game. But if Ole Miss is playing with a ton of confidence and finds themselves undefeated, that's going to be definitely a conversation. I think that people are going to feel pretty good about what Ole Miss could do in that game. But again, it's still Georgia. That's going to be tough. 2 weeks off after that to prepare for a trip to Florida, and then you get Mississippi State at home. Who knows if Florida is going to have their head coach? That's going to be a big thing there. So when you're looking at what is the ceiling for this team? I think a ceiling for this team is definitely 11-1. I just don't, I can't convince myself that they can beat Georgia right now. I've yet to see it, and I almost feel delusional thinking that they potentially could. Now, in an ideal scenario, they can, but if we're being somewhat realistic, even if everything's going right, 11-1 feels like the cap for this team. Now, if things are not going well, if the newcomers are not getting the job done, there's not depth. That's where things get a little bit interesting. Wake Forest is not a game I'm worried about. So the first four games are not really worrisome. That feels you're pretty solid 4-0. Kentucky is a game that could go the wrong way, even at home. At South Carolina and LSU are losable games. And again, this is if things are going wrong. This is if things aren't going their way. Depth is a concern. Injuries are concerned. That's the biggest thing there. Oklahoma is going to be better than people expect. Georgia's obviously, we talked about that's a losable game. Florida, depending on where they're at, that one depends on if they still have Billy Napier as a head coach. If they do, that means they're playing well. So that's going to be tough. But Ole Miss is the team that feels like they're destined for a 10-2 season. That feels like it's going to put them in a good spot for the college football playoff, a potential good spot for the SEC championship. That's maybe a little bit of a stretch, but the college football playoff is honestly the more attainable position because you don't have to win the conference to get in there. You finish 10-2, you feel like you're doing a pretty good job. Lane Kiffin has this program in a great spot. I feel like they brought in a lot of good talent that's going to compete. Again, Jackson Dart's Heisman campaign is going to get off to a potential good start with those first 4 games. And if that's the case, Ole Miss is going to play with a ton of confidence, and you're going to feel really good if you're an Ole Miss fan about what this team is capable of doing in 2024.